Hi, everyone. I wanted to share a book with you today, and I am going to give full credit to Mrs. Smith, our high school teacher. This is an idea that she shared with me, and I am stealing it to use for the library. It's called First Chapter Fridays, where I pick a book and I read the first chapter and hopefully get you interested in reading all about this book. And it is currently available. And the book I have chosen is The Summer of the Swans by Betsy Byars. Sarah Godfrey was lying on the bed, tying a kerchief on the dog Boise. "Hold your chin up, Boise, will you?" she said as she braced herself on one elbow. The dog was old, slept all the time, and he was lying on his side with his eyes closed while she lifted his head and tied the scarf. Her sister Wanda was sitting at the dressing table, combing her hair. Wanda said, "Why don't you leave Boise alone?" "There's nothing else to do," Sarah answered without looking up. "You want to see a show?" "Not particularly." "It's called The Many Faces of Boise." Now I know I don't want to see it. Sarah held up the dog with the kerchief neatly tied beneath his chin and said, "The first face of Boise, proudly presented for your entertainment and amusement, is the Russian peasant woman. Ta-da!" "Leave the dog alone." "He likes to be in shows, don't you, Boise?" She untied the scarf, refolded it, and set it carefully on the top of the dog's head. "And now for the second face of Boise. We travel halfway around the world to the mysterious East, where we see Boise, the inscrutable Hindu. Ta-da!" With a sigh, Wanda turned and looked at the dog. "That's pathetic. In people's age, that dog is 84 years old." She shook a can of hairspray and sprayed her hair. "And besides, that's my good scarf." "Oh, all right." Sarah fell back heavily against the pillow. "I can't do anything around here." "Well, if it's going to make you that miserable, I'll watch the show." "I don't want to do it anymore. It's no fun now. This place smells like a perfume factory." She put the scarf over her face and stared up through the thin blue material. Beside her, Boise lay back down and curled himself into a ball. They lay without moving for a moment, and then Sarah sat up on the bed and looked down at her long, lanky legs. She said, "I have the biggest feet in my school." "Honestly, Sarah, I hope you are not going to start listing all the millions of things wrong with you, because I just don't want to hear it again." "Well, it's the truth about my feet. One time in phys ed, the boys started throwing the girls' sneakers around, and Bull Durham got my sneakers and put them on, and they fit perfectly. How do you think it feels to wear the same size shoe as Bull Durham?" "People don't notice things like that." "Huh. No, they don't. I have perfectly terrible hands. Look at my fingers. Only I don't go around all the time saying, 'Everybody, look at my stubby fingers. I have stubby fingers. Everybody,' to make people notice. You should just ignore things that are wrong with you. The truth is, everyone else is so worried about what's wrong with them that it is very difficult to ignore the fact that you have huge feet when Bull Durham is dancing all over the gym in your shoes. They were not stretched the tiniest little bit when he took them off either. You wear the same size shoe as Jackie Kennedy Onassis, if that makes you feel any better." How do you know? Because one time when she was going on into an Indian temple, she had to leave her shoes outside, and some reporter looked in them to see what size they were. She leaned close to the mirror and looked at her teeth. Her feet look littler. That's because she doesn't wear orange sneakers. I like my orange sneakers. Sarah sat on the edge of the bed, slipped her feet into the shoes, and held them up. What's wrong with them? Nothing, except that when you want to hide something, you don't go painting it orange. I've got to go. Frank's coming. She went out the door, and Sarah could hear her crossing into the kitchen. Sarah lay back down on the bed, her head next to Boise. She looked at the sleeping dog, then covered her face with her hands and began to cry noisily. Oh, Boise, Boise, I'm crying, she wailed. Years ago, when Boise was a young dog, he could not bear to hear anyone cry. Sarah had only to pretend she was crying, and Boise would come running. He would whine and dig at her with his paws and lick her hands until she stopped. Now he lay with his eyes closed. Boise, I'm crying, she said again. I'm really crying this time. Boise, don't you love me? The dog shifted uneasily without opening his eyes. Boise, Boise, I'm crying. I'm so sad. Boise. She wailed, and then she stopped and sat up abruptly. You don't care about anybody, do you, Boise? A person could cry herself to death these days, and you wouldn't care. She got up and left the room. In the hall, she heard the tapping noise of Boise's feet behind her, and she said without looking at him, I don't want you now, Boise. Go on back into the bedroom. Go on. She went a few steps farther, and, when he continued to follow her, turned and looked at him. In case you are confused, Boise, a dog is supposed to comfort people and run up and nuzzle them and make them feel better. All you want to do is lie on the soft things and hide bones in the house because you're too lazy to go outside. Just go on back in the bedroom. She started into the kitchen, still followed by Boise, who could not bear to be left alone, then heard her aunt and Wanda arguing, changed her mind, and went out onto the porch. Behind her, Boise scratched at the door, and she let him out. Now quit following me. Her brother Charlie was sitting on the top step, and Sarah sat down beside him. She held out her feet, looked at them, and said, I like my orange sneakers. Don't you, Charlie? He did not answer. He had been eating a lollipop, and the stick had come off, and now he was trying to put it back into the red candy. He had been trying for so long that the stick was bent. Here, she said, I'll do it for you. She put the stick in and handed it to him. Now be careful with it. She sat without speaking for a moment. Then she looked down at her feet and said, I hate these orange sneakers. I just hate them. She leaned back against the porch railing so she wouldn't have to see them and said, Charlie, I'll tell you something. This has been the worst summer of my life. She did not know exactly why this was true. She was doing the same things she had done last summer. Walk to the Dairy Queen with her friend Mary, babysit for Mrs. Hodge, watch television, and yet everything was different. It was as if her life was a huge kaleidoscope, and the kaleidoscope had been turned, and now everything was changed. The same stones, shaken, no longer made the same design. Here she is with her brother. But it was not only one different design, one change. It was 100. She could never be really sure of anything this summer. One moment she was happy, and the next, for no reason, she was miserable. An hour ago she had loved her sneakers. Now she detested them. Charlie, I'll tell you what this awful summer's been like. You remember when that binky Jim Wilson got you on the seesaw? Remember that? And he kept bouncing you up and down, and then he'd keep you up in the air for a really long time, and then he'd drop you down real sudden, and you couldn't get off, and you thought you would never up and down for the rest of your life. Well, that's what this summer's been like for me. He held out the candy and the stick to her. Not again! She took it from him. This piece of candy is so gross that I don't even want to touch it, if you want to know the truth. She put the stick back in and handed it to him. Now, if it comes off again, and I mean this, Charlie Godfrey, I'm throwing the candy away. And that was the first chapter of The Summer of the Swans by Betsy Byars. Now, this is an AR book. It's worth 4 points, and it's quiz number 87. So I hope you enjoyed the first chapter of The Summer of the Swans.